If you think you know all about marijuana, let me assure you, you don't. Today, our series on marijuana legalization continues with an eye-opening discussion on how potent it is today and what's happening with this highly potent product if consumed in quantity. That's next on Significant Insights. Welcome back for part 2 of our 3-part series on marijuana legalization. Our guest is Joe McGuire. Joe lives in Colorado, which legalized marijuana in 2012. She is also the co-chair of the Marijuana Education Committee, and she was appointed to serve on the Colorado Governor's Task Force, which was formed after marijuana became legal. She's also the chairman of the board for the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. Last week in part 1, she spoke to TLN's Greg Bogdan about the potency of marijuana today. Back in the 1960s and 70s, joints with THC, which is the psychoactive component of marijuana, were only 1 to 3% potent. When potency rose to 5%, signs of addiction became evident. In fact, in Europe, THC potency over 15% is illegal. But in Colorado, products that have 60, 70, 80, and even 90% THC are on the market in a lot of different products.
Let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of marijuana that are available. I mean, obviously we've got the joint, which we all assume is the most consumed, or at least I would consider the most consumed. But what else is out there today?
Well, actually, the joint is losing in popularity. The number 1 selling product in the state of Colorado are by far the edibles, and then the number 2 product would be the vape pens or e-cigarette cartridges. So they're THC cartridges that drop into the e-cigarette or vape pen, so we refer to those as vapes. Yep. And highly potent, extremely high potency, very popular amongst kids. There's a product called a Juul. It looks like a flash drive that goes in your computer, and it's actually a smoking device for students, and of course, you know, they can hide it in the palm of their hand. So very popular amongst kids. So those high potency products are what we're seeing the most of, and also you don't smell the pot with the vape pen. So the open and public smoking is everywhere. Wow. Because the smell is not detected. Now, when it comes to the edibles, extremely popular, and you can find marijuana edible products in any shape or form. There are teas, coffees, sodas, ice creams, peanut butters, cookies, candies. You know, a lot of us are familiar with the old school brownies, and then many of us have seen the advertisements or the news stories about the gummy bears, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's pizza sauces, salsas, Chex Mix.
You're kidding.
No, it's absolutely endless. And these products, while highly potent, first of all, the body receives them differently because everyone takes in that type of edible in a different way depending on their body chemistry. You don't feel the high right away. It has to actually get into the bloodstream. And so people have a tendency to overconsume because they'll eat a little bit and I don't feel high, eat a little bit more. Next thing you know, they're in the emergency room saying, you know, I'm sick, I don't know what's happening. We have documented case after case after case where people say, I'm losing touch with reality, I don't know what's real, I don't know if you're real, and hallucinating and that type of thing. So the high lasts longer. That's something people need to understand. It's no longer, you know, like 4 hours and you're buzzed. Many people are reporting that they consume these things and they feel high for a day, 24 hours. Wow. So there's just a variety of outcomes here that affect a lot of different areas, workplace, schools, you know, that type of thing. Okay, so let's go back to these edibles. When we have these edible products, cannabis is a very viscous, oily substance, and it's really hard to mix it in evenly. So when you get a product, you know, you can't be certain that every bite contains the same amount of THC as the rest of the portion that you're consuming. Some will pack a punch and some may not. in the same product or in a sister product that's in a different package. So there's large variables there. So I've been asked, you know, why isn't this regulated better? Well, marijuana is not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA can have no oversight over marijuana because, first of all, it's a Schedule I substance, so it's considered a contaminant in food, not an ingredient, okay? So the FDA is not involved in this whatsoever. Now at the state level, the state does not have a statewide Food and Drug Administration. That doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay. So Colorado's oversight over the legal marijuana system is our Colorado State Department of Revenue. Okay.
Wow.
So what does the Department of Revenue know about food preparations and contamination? Colorado Department of Public Health will have a little bit of influence in inspecting kitchens and whatnot, but they don't control any of that. The Marijuana Enforcement Division responds to complaints. That's all they have the capacity to do because of lack of budget and lack of personnel. So obviously we haven't created enough revenue to fully fund the enforcement. Right? So we have product that contains contamination. The FDA cannot get involved. The state is not involved in that. So what we do is we have spot checks of product. So companies that make these products, they send in a sample quarterly, and they get a label back that says this sample contained, you know, these percentages of these ingredients, and then they run that label for the next quarter, and then they'll send in another sample. So I've asked manufacturers, and please understand that manufacturers are people like you and me that set up an industrial kitchen in their home, or maybe they buy a space and create up, you know, set up an industrial setting, but it's not overseen or regulated by any governmental entity. These are just folks who are getting in the business, okay? So, you know, I've asked them, what if you run a label for 3 months and the ingredients actually change, the potency changes? And they'll say, oh, that happens all the time, it's to be expected. We know that's the way that the game is played. So internally, the industry knows that's how it works. Externally, you and I, we believe that if we're eating something that has a particular label, that the label is true.
Right.
And I go to states all the time and I'm explaining this process, and people will argue with me and say, you are lying, that cannot be true. Nobody would allow us to eat food that's, every single piece of it is not inspected. And so as I've talked to people who are inside the marijuana industry, they affirm over and over again, you are telling the truth. This is the way that it works.
Wow.
And we just don't know. You know, I'll tell you, we have recalled products all the time in the state of Colorado. We get bulletins out from the Marijuana Enforcement Division that entire product lines are recalled. Sometimes the distributors are shut down because of violations, because of the contamination that are in these products, and there are a variety of things. So this is something that we don't have a grip on, and yet we are just letting it roll.
I had a son come home recently from high school, and a teenager, and he was telling me that at their high school that they had a kid that's passing out gummy bears with THC in it, and the kids he wasn't making it aware to the kids, and three different kids ended up in the hospital, and of course the high school was furious about it, but those kids had no idea what they were consuming, and only 2 or 3 of these gummy bears. I mean, obviously a few of these kids, they were throwing up, they were sick, and it was a pretty significant situation. You
know, 2 or 3 gummy bears, right? The average gummy bear candy has 4 servings of THC in it. We have decided in Colorado that 10 milligrams is a serving, and it's not based on anything but conjecture, and it sounds good to us, so that's what we decide. It's a suggestion, it's not mandatory. So we ask people in the industry to try to stick to 10 milligrams per serving. But you'll have a can of soda that has 4 to 7 servings in it, between 40 and 70 milligrams of THC. Who drinks a 1/7 of a can of soda? A gummy bear, 4 servings. Who eats a 1/4 of a gummy bear?
Right.
No one.
Right.
Not even a toddler. You have cookies that have 6 servings in a cookie, and you're advised to cut it in 6 pieces and eat 1/6. I know of no young person who eats a sixth of a cookie.
Right.
You know, even Oreos, you break them in half. That's not sixth, you know. So this is all preposterous, and the overdosing is rampant, and that's why our emergency room visits, as you saw in this case, have skyrocketed.
Right.
Let me also say that when children get a hold of these products, which happens frequently, many of them have to be intubated because they have stopped breathing.
Wow.
So you'll hear you cannot overdose on marijuana, it's safe, it's harmless. When you have to help a child breathe, let's just be very grateful that our emergency services have responded so far every time.
And I think it used to be that, you know, again, when before the edibles and all this different thing, these things came around, I think it was more normal to argue the fact that, I mean, how many joints could you smoke before you could overdose? But with the potency issues that are happening now, and especially with the ability to put it into food, I think the potential obviously is there. And I think that although we still hear the argument all the time, oh, you can't overdose on it.
You know, have you ever known anyone who overdosed on a tobacco cigarette?
No.
No. So yet we know that tobacco is not good because there are tobacco-related illnesses and death.
Right.
We have the same outcomes with marijuana. We have marijuana-related illness and death. We have hyperemesis syndrome, which is well documented in the medical community. It's cyclical vomiting. People end up with digestive problems. It can lead to heart problems long term, extreme weight loss. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible disease. And we have people who have gotten down to 80 and 90 pounds from this hyperemesis syndrome, which is as a result of over-consuming marijuana. But we say, well, it's safe. And yet, if you have someone with lung cancer, you don't say, well, tobacco is safe. That person just happened to be predisposed to lung cancer. So we have a complete double standard here. And I'll tell you what, it took us 80 years to get smart to big tobacco. And here we are falling for it all over again.
Right.
Think about the fact that when my dad was a kid, tobacco was out there saying doctors recommend Camels. Most dentists smoke Viceroys, right? And so we went to the tobacco industry and said those were lies, your claims were lies. Well, here we have medical marijuana, and we're promising all of these solutions, and everybody's going, wow, you know, I'm not for recreational marijuana, but I really believe in medical marijuana. And yet we don't have any proof, okay? And so we're just buying into the snake oil. And then the next thing that tobacco did was they targeted kids because that's the future market. You get the kids hooked and then you have a lifetime consumer. So right now we're in the phase of getting those kids hooked and convincing these kids that this is good, it's healthy, it's natural, while we on the back end genetically alter this substance so that it's more powerful than ever before. It doesn't represent even a fraction of the natural growing substance, and so we're creating the addiction just like tobacco did. And then we're hiding the fact, completely denying that there are marijuana-related health effects and death. And we will sit someday before Congress once again and uncover the truth as the world is shocked that we were deceived because we're just repeating history.
Joe's warnings brings to mind the famous saying, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. After the break, Joe will talk about the effect marijuana legalization is having on babies born in Colorado, and why the assurance that legalization would eliminate the black market and help minorities has turned into more empty promises.
Incidentally, I want you to understand that arrests of minorities for marijuana-related offenses in Colorado is actually increased. It has not decreased as the marijuana industry has promised. So that's something that the state of Illinois really needs to take a look at.
Welcome back. Today, TLN's Greg Bogdan is talking with drug educator Joe McGuire about marijuana legalization. Her home state of Colorado legalized marijuana in 2012 and is now living with the ramifications of that decision. Some of Colorado's most vulnerable citizens, newborn babies, are among those who are suffering the consequences of legalization.
In Pueblo, Colorado, over 50% of babies born are THC positive. And we know that THC crosses the placental barrier. We know that THC is excreted in the breast milk. And here we are, we don't even know the full effects of the long-term effects on these children. And many of us know that in 10 years we'll be looking at something similar to fetal alcohol syndrome, and yet we're willing to bear that cost in order to add legal marijuana into society.
Right. I know a lot of people use the argument that legalizing it may reduce the crime rate based upon the fact that there would be no longer a need for there to be the illegal portion of the marijuana use. What have we seen as far as crime?
Our law enforcement officers will tell you that they spend more time on marijuana offenses now that it's legal because of people trying to obtain it illegally, illegal grow operations, crimes associated with, we have folks, one of the most common crimes is young people are trying to get into the grow operations in the homes and steal the product. We have gangs who are stealing it from each other. In addition to the roadside fatalities and traffic crashes that are going on, we have crimes in homeless camps because we now have tent cities of homeless people who have come to Colorado. They self-admittedly say, we came here to smoke the weed, and they stand out on the street sign and say, you know, give me weed or spare a joint, need money for pot. My DA in my community says the only thing legal marijuana has brought Colorado Springs is more homicide. So our police are overwhelmed by the related crime to legal marijuana, where prior to legalization, it was out of sight, out of mind. This is not, they didn't pursue people who smoked a joint. The only time you really got arrested for any type of marijuana related offense was if it was like a federal level felony, tons or pounds,
Right.
that was intent to distribute, going outside of the state, diversion, that type of thing, or if it was tacked on as a secondary charge when there was something serious like domestic violence, you know, and then there's marijuana discovered. Well, you're in trouble for the domestic violence or the theft, or, you know, a lot of auto theft and that type of thing. And then marijuana is tacked on as a secondary offense, but it's not the primary. Right. And we have to remember that because we're believing some, you know, misguided notions about what that really looks like. And incidentally, I want you to understand that arrests of minorities for marijuana-related offenses in Colorado is actually increased. It has not decreased as the marijuana industry has promised. So that's something that the state of Illinois really needs to take a look at.
Well, I know that there was a lot of discussion, at least, and I think that's still happening, of the incarceration rate being higher in the black communities versus the white communities and so forth. Has that changed anything with this?
It has not changed.
Okay.
You'll see far more marijuana retail stores in the poor, low-income, minority communities, and we actually have a group in a suburb of Denver that says we are being loaded down disproportionately with these retail stores for marijuana and not being allowed to participate in the revenue stream or the business side of it, while increased minorities are still going to jail for these related offenses.
So in the same way we see a liquor store at every stop sign in a poor community, or Planned Parenthood putting their buildings in the lower or poor communities, we're seeing the same thing with this.
Absolutely the same.
Interesting. And have we seen any major change in the illegal trade?
You know, that's a fantastic question. We were promised that legal marijuana would eliminate the black market. But when you promise the voters that you're going to have a control, tax, and regulate program, And simultaneously, in that same law, you allow people to grow marijuana in their home, 5 plants per adult. What you do is you set up a system that undercuts itself. You cannot regulate what people do in their own home. You can't control it. You can't tax it. So the home grow operations are actually feeding a steady stream of what we've referred to as the gray market, and some of it then literally becomes black market, but it goes out the back end. The volume that we've allowed, 5 plants per person, is more than most people could ever use. And then you're trusting on an honor system that people stick to the 5 plants.
Right.
The average home grow in the state of Colorado that law enforcement ends up responding to for a variety of reasons, 80 to 100 plants in a home. So when you have that kind of volume, it's being distributed everywhere.
Right.
That's the source that's getting into the hands of kids. That's the source that's being diverted out of state. That's the source that is attractive to the cartels from outside the U.S. And all you're doing is setting up a black market with a, what I would call, my personal opinion, is a front for something legitimate, while on the backside, the goal here is to normalize this in society and make it available to everyone so that we will all have a casual attitude. And in my opinion, Americans need to smarten up and take a look at why. Why do we want to have a nation that is stoned? Why? Why would we do that?
Right.
That's the real question here.
You know, Joe poses a really good question. Why are certain people fighting so hard for our country to be stoned? Just doesn't make any sense. Final thoughts after the break. Welcome back. You know, I really appreciate Joe being with us because this has been an eye-opener. And it's not over. We have another program, and you're going to be hearing some more information that is just as powerful as what you heard today. You know, I remember a few years ago when, as a television ministry, we took on the whole gambling struggle in Chicago and Illinois. And we did a lot of research. And it was interesting because what we discovered was that all of the casino people who were coming into town and wanting to build the casinos, and all of the politicians that were promoting it, all kinds of promises were made, huge promises about the financial benefits of the gambling industry. And you know what happened? They were giants in their promises and pygmies in the fulfillment. Most of the things didn't happen. We did research, for example, in Atlantic City. None of the promises that were made about reviving the neighborhoods and all of this was happening. Drive through downtown Aurora, Illinois today and see the kind of impact that it's had on downtown Aurora. Look at the tent cities around the country. Look at the people flocking into Colorado because now marijuana is legalized. They can go there and they can get stoned without having to worry about going to jail. And look at the potency, the impact that Joe had described on babies. 50% in a certain county are being affected. That is absolutely stunning, and yet we see that, and we see all over the country now politicians are pushing to have, in fact in Illinois, one of the candidates is pushing for legalization because they feel that it's going to have such a positive impact. Don't believe it, it's a lie. It's not going to have a positive impact, and we're seeing the negative impact in various parts of the country. Thanks for joining me. God bless you. We'll see you next time.